best in the world, Messi, Ronaldo, and the third name. For the better part of a decade and a half, the conversation about the best footballer alive belonged almost exclusively to two men, Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo. Lewandowski's career, in a strange way, ran directly alongside and occasionally directly through both of theirs, without him ever fully displacing either from that duopoly. Even at his own statistical peak, he beat Ronaldo's Real Madrid twice in a single Champions League semi-final to reach a European final. As a 20-year-old, he faced Messi's Barcelona repeatedly across a decade with Bayern, including that painful mass performance in the 2015 semi-final, before eventually walking into the Camp Nou dressing room himself in 2022, 1 year after Messi had walked out of it. He finished runner-up to Messi in the 2021 Ballon d'Or voting, having arguably been the outright front-runner for the previous award before it was scrapped entirely. Pundits, teammates, and rival managers spent the 2019 to 2021 stretch, his statistical peak, regularly debating whether he had become, purely as a goal-scoring machine, the best number 9 in the world, full stop, ahead of both members of football's reigning duopoly on any given week. He never quite won that argument in the court of major individual awards, collecting 2 FIFA Best Men's Player trophies but no Ballon d'Or of his own. But by the time all 3 careers reached their late stages, Messi in Miami, Ronaldo across Portugal, Saudi Arabia and Chicago, it had become fairly uncontroversial among series analysts to describe the 3 of them as having defined between them the era of individual brilliance stretching from roughly 2008 to the mid-2020s. Lewandowski's case for inclusion in that conversation rested on something neither Messi nor Ronaldo ever needed: Crossy, almost different clubs deep into his late 30s.
The Robert Lewandowski story, Stockholm, in March of 2026. In March of 2026, 6 walked off a pitch in Stockholm, having just lost 3-2 to Sweden in a World Cup playoff final. He was 37 years old, the captain of Poland, the record scorer and record cap holder in the history of Polish football. And for the first time since 2014, his country would not be going to a World Cup, with him in the squad. He didn't say much to the cameras, he didn't have to. A few hours later, a photograph appeared on his social media. The frame set to Andrea Bocelli and Sarah Brightman's "Time to Say Goodbye." No caption was needed, everyone understood it as a man quietly closing the door on a World Cup dream that already cost him more heartbreak than almost any elite striker on Poland itself. It would not, in the end, be goodbye. But it was the first of 3 doors that would close on Robert Lewandowski. Within the space of about 4 months in 2026, the international door in March, the Barcelona door in May, and the European door in July, when he told a room of reporters in Chicago that he simply didn't want to stay on the continent anymore. To understand how a boy from a modest Warsaw suburb ended up as one of the most ruthlessly efficient goal scorers the sport has produced, and why his story would not in Munich or Barcelona but on the shores of Lake Michigan, you have to back to the beginning, to 2 athletes who never became stars themselves, and to a boy who by his own late admission wasn't even most promising kid in his own house.
Warsaw, and the House of Athletes. Robert Lewandowski was born on August 21, 1988 in Warsaw, in the final unraveling years of communist Poland. He was raised in a household built entirely around sport, though not around football specifically. His father, Krzysztof Lewandowski, of national standard, also played the game himself at a lower level. His mother, Iwona, had been a volleyball player in her own right, good enough to turn out for AZ's Warszawa, and later to serve as vice president of the amateur club Partizan Leszno, where young Robert took his first competitive touches of a ball. His older sister, Melina, would go on to play volleyball at a serious level too. For a while, in fact, she was considered the more obviously gifted athlete in the family. It was not a household of football romantics dreaming their son into the Bundesliga. It was a household of discipline of a father who understood from judo what it meant to condition a body for combat, and a mother who understood the same from a different sport entirely. That ethic, unglamorous, obsessive about the fundamentals, is the thread that runs through almost every account of Lewandowski's rise. He was never the raw, jaw-dropping talent that scouts fight over as the one who kept showing up. The Lewandowski name would come to be associated with one of football's most complete goal-scoring instincts, but the club pathway that produced it was almost defiantly unglamorous. From Partizan Leszno, he moved into the youth ranks of MK's Varsovia Warsaw, where he spent 7 formative years. Then came a series of moves that read less like the CV of a future Bundesliga and La Liga icon than like the itinerant path of a journeyman. Delta Warszawa, a spell with Legia Warsaw reserve side, then Znicz Prusko's own reserves, before he finally broke into Znicz Prusko's first team. In 2005, everything changed at once. Krzysztof Lewandowski died. He was in his early 50s. For a 17-year-old who had grown up measuring himself against his father's old-school athletic standards, the loss reordered his priorities overnight. By his own later account, and that of people close to the family, it was in the aftermath of his father's death that treating football as one interest among several, and started treating it as the thing he was going to do with his life, whatever it took. Znicz, Paul's 9. And the scout who saw it coming. Znicz Prusko were not a big club. They were not even, at the time, a top-flight club. But it was there, grinding through Poland's lower divisions between 2006 and 2008, that Lewandowski first turned goal scoring into a habit rather than an occasional event. He scored consistently enough in Poland, second in tiers that Lechia, a considerably bigger operation with genuine European ambition, decided to take a chance on him in 2008. It was the correct decision. Over 2 seasons in Poznan, Lewandowski to the best striker title in the 29 season, finishing as one of the league's most productive forwards along the way. It was enough to get him capped for the senior Poland side. He'd already come up through the U21s. It was enough to get him noticed well outside Poland's borders. The man who noticed him was Jurgen Klopp. Kloppo's killer. Borussia Dortmund in 2010 were in the early stages of building something that would come to define an era of German football. Ferociously pressing, counter-attacking side under a manager whose energy on the touchline mirrored the chaos he demanded from his players on it. Klopp needed a focal point up front who could finish the moves that Jejen pressing created. Someone who thrived on transition, on half chances, manufactured at speed. He signed the 22-year-old Pole from Lech Posen in the summer of 2010. It took Lewandowski almost no time to become indispensable. Dortmund won back-to-back Bundesliga titles in his first 2 seasons, and in 2012 he was the on-field spearhead that completed the double and the DFB Pokal to the league crown. He wasn't merely scoring goals, he was becoming the clear embodiment of what Klopp's Dortmund was trying to be: relentless, vertical, unafraid. Kloppo's killer. Kloppo's killer. Relentless. Relentless. Vertical, unafraid. Relentless. vertical, unafraid. Then came the night that made the rest of Europe sit up. In April 2013, Dortmund hosted Real Madrid in the first leg of a Champions League semi-final. Lewandowski scored the opener inside 8 minutes. Cristiano Ronaldo equalized just before halftime. And then, in a 20-minute spell after the break, Lewandowski simply took the game apart. A second goal beating the offside trap, a stunning solo effort to complete his hat trick, and a coolly dispatched penalty to make it 4. Dortmund won 4-1. He became the first player in Champions League history to score 4 goals in a semi-final, and Klopp, embracing every one of his players afterward, called it pure football, unstoppable football. Dortmund reached the final at Wembley that May, the first all-German Champions League final in the competition's history. They lost 2-1 to Bayern Munich, beaten by the very club. Lewandowski would join a year later. It remains the closest he has come in more than a decade and a half at the top level to lifting the one trophy that eluded him longest. The free transfer that broke Dortmund's heart. What happened next is one of the more bitter footnotes in modern Bundesliga history. Lewandowski's contract with Dortmund ran down, and rather than re-sign or move for a fee, he engineered or simply allowed to happen free transfer to Bayern Munich in the summer of 2014. For Dortmund's fans, this was close to unforgivable. Their best player, the face of 2 title wins and a Champions League final run, walking straight into the Yellow and Black's biggest domestic rival without so much as a transfer fee changing hands. The wounds from that departure would take years to heal, and in some corners of the Dortmund fan base, they never fully did. For Lewandowski, though, the move was less about provocation than about ambition. Dortmund's financial gravity could not compete with Bayern's, and Bayern offered the shortest route to the trophies, and specifically the Champions League that had slipped away from him at Wembley. It would take longer than he expected, but when it finally arrived, it arrived spectacularly. 8 years. 44 goals. Lewandowski's Bayern Munich career, spanning 2014 to 2022, is one of the most statistically dominant striking in spells in the sport's modern history. Across 8 seasons, he scored 344 goals. 374 goals and 375 for the club. Essentially a goal a game, sustained not for a purple patch of 18 months, but for the better part of a decade. He won 8 consecutive Bundesliga titles, the DFB Pokal 3 times, a clutch of domestic and European Super Cups, the FIFA Club World Cup, and at last the Champions League itself. There were nights that turned into folklore. In September 2015, Bayern trailed. Wolfsburg won it at halftime. Pep Guardiola sent Lewandowski as a substitute, and inside 8 minutes and 59 seconds to be exact, he scored 5 goals. In Bundesliga history at 3 minutes and 22 seconds. Guardiola stood on the touchline with his head in his hands, telling reporters that afterward that he doubted he would ever see anything like it again. Lewandowski himself later admitted that the whole spell felt like a blur, that he genuinely lost track of both the minutes and the goal count while it was happening. He was awarded 4 separate Guinness World Records for the performance. The records kept falling. In the 2020-21 season, he broke a mark that had stood for almost half a century, scoring 41 Bundesliga goals in a single campaign to eclipse Gerd Muller's legendary 40 from 1971 to from 1972, a number regarded for decades as essentially unbreakable. He was Bundesliga top scorer 7 times over the course of his German career. Bayern's Nigga top scores over the course of a single German career. An extraordinary run and dominance in one of Europe's most competitive leagues. In the FIFA Club World Cup, a sexable no other European club had managed. Lewandowski was the tournament's top scorer across that Champions League campaign. The attacking heartbeat of a Bayern side, playing some of the most ruthless football in the club's history. On the back of it, he was named the FIFA Best Men's Player and would win the award again the following year. Back-to-back recognition of just how far ahead of field he had pulled.
44 goals, 8 years, sustained dominance.
By any reasonable measure, the year of 2020 should have been the season Robert Lewandowski finally won the individual trophy. He had the goals, the trophies, the individual awards, and a Champions title on his curriculum vitae after that painful near-miss with the club in the Ruhr district 7 years earlier. Instead, the awards simply didn't happen. The French football magazine canceled the 2020 award outright, citing the disruption the pandemic had caused to the football calendar and comparing seasons fairly across leagues that have played wildly different numbers of games. The striker, by nearly pundits' estimation, was the man who lost the most from that decision, a confining trophy that simply vanished from the calendar the one year he was the standout candidate to win it. The following year, the award returned, and Lewandowski was in serious contention again. He finished runner-up in the 21 voting behind the Argentine icon. It meant that across the 2 seasons that represented the statistical peak of his entire career, he collected 0 of the prestigious gold trophies, a strange, faintly cruel quirk of timing that will likely follow his legacy for as long as people argue about the award's history. Even in the middle of Bayern's most dominant years, something in the athlete kept pulling him toward the exit. The former chief executive later revealed that the striker had quietly asked to leave the club almost every single year of his time there. Frustrated in the early seasons by the club's end of the line in the Premier Continental competition, winning it in 2020 eased that particular itch. It didn't kill the underlying professional restless. By 2022, with his contract entering its final year, the restlessness became public. Lewandowski made clear he had no intention of signing a new deal in Barcelona, a club in genuine financial disarray, having just been forced to let their own icon leave for nothing the previous summer, emerged as his most likely destination. The Bayern hierarchy dug in publicly. The former chief executive questioned what exactly the Catalan city could offer that the Bavarian capital couldn't. For much of the summer, the club's official line was that Lewandowski was simply not for sale. It didn't hold. Bayern eventually accepted an offer worth around 45 million, with a further 45 million in add-ons, and Lewandowski signed a 4-year contract at Camp Nou carrying a 500 million release clause. Bayern's chief executive, Ola Khan, framed the exit diplomatically, thanking Lewandowski for his contribution while insisting the club's wouldn't clap for his part was considerably less diplomatic. Once he'd settled in Barcelona, reporters that somewhat had been said about his departure back home amounted to little more than manufactured excuses aiming at an unhappy fan base. He was careful, though, to draw a line under any suggestion his exit was driven by personal grievance, insisting that after 8 years in total comfort at Bayern, it was simply time at 33 to test himself somewhere new before the opportunity to do so disappeared for good. Camp Nou's old warrior! Lewandowski's 4 seasons at Barcelona did what he'd hoped they would. They extended his prime, rather than closing it out gently. He arrived at a club that had finished second in La Liga and crashed out of the Champions League at the group stage the year before. A giant temporarily diminished by its own financial mismatchment. He left it 4 years later, a 3-time La Liga champion.
The individual numbers held up remarkably well for a man moving through his mid-30s. He topped the Pichichi Trophy as La Liga's leading scorer, a feat that combined with his 7 Bundesliga golden boots made him the joint all-time record holder for top score awards across Europe's 5 major leagues, with 8 in total. In the 2024-25 season alone, at 36 years old, he scored 27 league goals, his best return in Spain, and became the first player in any of Europe's top 5 leagues that campaigned to reach 30 goals in all competitions, hitting the mark before February was out. Barcelona won the Copa del Rey in 2025 to go with the league titles, and by the time his contract ran down in the summer of 2026, he had scored London 19 goals and 19 1-on-1 appearances across all competitions in Catalonia, a strike rate that, for a player signed as a 33-year-old stopgap, reads more like the record of a player entering his peak than leaving it. On May 16, 2026, he confirmed what had been rumored for months: he would leave Barcelona at the end of the season, once his contract expired. He said as much himself in a message posted to his followers, describing 4 seasons full of challenges and hard work, and saying the time had come to move on. He described his mission at the club as complete, arriving during a period of financial crisis and departing having helped Barcelona to the top of Spanish football. He said goodbye to the Camp Nou faithful during the final home match of the season against Real Betis, closing out the last full-time European chapter of his career.
The armband. While all of this was unfolding on the pitch, Lewandowski's relationship with the Polish national team was going through its own turbulence, arguably the most public and painful episode of his international career. In June 2025, ahead of a crucial World Cup qualifier against Finland, Lewandowski told then manager Mika Prebiers that he needed to step away from the squad, citing physical and mental exhaustion after a grueling club season. Prebiers' response stunned Polish football. He stripped Lewandowski of the captaincy altogether, handing the armband to Midtjylland Piotr Zielinski, and culminated the decision to Lewandowski over what was reportedly a brief phone call, with the news breaking publicly. With the news breaking publicly almost immediately afterward, before Lewandowski had even fully processed it himself. Lewandowski's reaction was blunt and unambiguous. He announced he would not play for the national team again as long as Prebiers remained in charge. Poland, without their captain and record scorer, lost 2-1 to Finland, a result that would go on to cost them a direct route to the 2026 World Cup and forced them into the playoff path that eventually ended in Stockholm. Days after defeat, with pressure mounting from every direction, Prebiers resigned, describing the captaincy of the national side as the honor of his professional life, even as he left the post under a cloud. His successor Jan Urban moved fast. Within weeks of taking the job, Urban had publicly called the decision to strip Lewandowski of the armband a mistake. Reached out personally and reinstated him as captain for Poland's September 2025 fixtures, with Zielinski shifted to vice captain and Jan Bednarik named third captain. A structure, the emotional truth of that framing, the qualifying damage from the Finland defeat. Once he returned, insisting to Sweden had been greatly exaggerated. Whatever the emotional truth of that framing, the qualifying damage from the Finland defeat, Poland went to the playoffs and lost to Sweden in March 2026. Poland's relationship with the World Cup is a strange, lopsided story of its own. A country whose golden generation, led by Grzegorz Lato and Zbigniew Boniek, finished third at the tournament twice, in 1974 and 1982, and then largely disappeared from the world stage for a quarter century. Lewandowski's career has coincided with his re-emergence. He dragged them almost single-handedly at times to the first World Cup in 12 years in 2018, only to leave Russia without a single goal to his name as Poland crashed out in the group stage. 9 decades 2022 offered a measure of redemption. In the group stage win over Saudi Arabia, Lewandowski finally scored his World Cup finals goals, and at a weight that'd stretch across an entire career of otherwise goal scoring at every level of the club game. Poland again went out in the round of 16, beaten by a playoff loss to Sweden in March 2026. Combined to end at 37. Any realistic hope of a final World Cup appearance, it is the one significant absence on otherwise overflowing resume. The Champions League final he lost with an otherwise old appearance. A third World Cup never arrived. The captaincy saga he lost with Dortmund as most capped player, and eventually won with Bayern's. Has a mirror image in the World Cup. He simply never got to finish on his own terms. As of the summer of 26, he remained Poland's captain. It's all-time captain, it's all-time with 89 goals. And it's most capped player with 167 appearances. Records that, barring a remarkable late career international renaissance, are likely to stand for a generation. Anna Clara Laura. Away from the pitch, Lewandowski's life has been built around a partner champion sport before pivoting into nutrition, fitness, coaching south the Polish capital.
Lewandowski's life has been built around a partner who was, in her own right, an elite competitor before their paths crossed. Anna Staherska, born in Lodz in September 1988, just weeks after Robert, was a decorated karateka, multiple melodies that world and European champions who represented Poland at the highest level of the sport were pivoting into nutrition, fitness, coaching, and entrepreneurship. The two met around 2010 through Warsaw World of Sports Education and married on June 22, 2013 in Sirok, outside the Polish capital. Their partnership has always had a professional dimension as well as a personal one. Anna, a qualified nutritionist, has been closely involved in shaping the dietary and training discipline that many close to Lewandowski credit with extending his career and preserving his condition well into his late 30s. A modern echo, in some ways, of the disciplined athletic household he was raised in himself. She built her own brand, Healthy by Anne, alongside a calm aesthetics line and a body of published work on fitness and nutrition, becoming a significant public figure in Poland independent of her husband's fame. The couple have two daughters, Clara, born in 2017, and Laura, born in May 2020. Lewandowski, a practicing Catholic known for his private, public persona, has generally kept his family life shielded from the more tabloid corners of football media. Though photographs of Anna and the girls at Camp Nou celebrations, including the 2025 La Liga title win, have become a familiar part of the public record of his later career. Away from football and nutrition, he has developed a reputation as a genuine cooking enthusiast, occasionally sharing his own creations, and has quietly built a portfolio of investments, including in the air sports space, a striker's instinct for spotting value applied in retirement adjacent years to something other than the 18-yard box.
Windy City!
The final act for now unfolded fast once Barcelona confirmed his exit for a period in early 2026. It looked as though Lewandowski might stay in Europe. Barcelona's own president Joan Laporta reportedly wanted to keep him, even as sporting director Deco and head coach Hansi Flick preferred to move in a different direction. And there was interest from Serie A clubs in Portugal's FC Porto, along with a lucrative approach from the Saudi Pro League that he ultimately turned down. But Chicago Fire, working the deal patiently since as early as January 2025, according to head coach Greg Berhalter, kept the contact alive through every twist of the Barcelona saga. In June 2026, Lewandowski traveled to Chicago to meet club executives and see the project in person. On June 29, The move was made official, a 2-year contract running through the 2027-28 MLS season with Chicago Fire. A designated player deal, reported by his agent Pini Zahavi, to be the second highest salary in the league, behind only Lionel Messi's at Inter Miami. Belgian forward Hugo Kuipers, the club's leading scorer the previous year, handed over the number 9 shirt before completing his own move to Mexico City at Monterrey, clearing the way for Lewandowski to become the new face of the franchise. Windy City! At his unveiling, Lewandowski was disarmingly candid about the decision. Asked why he hadn't chosen to stay in Europe, where interest from clubs like AC Milan had been real. He said simply that once his time at Barcelona was over, he didn't want to remain on the continent at all. That after Bayern, Dortmund and Barcelona, it was time for something genuinely different. Berhalter presenting his new start, as Chicago called it rare to find a player who has found a way to win wherever he's gone, and framed the signing as a statement of intent for a club chasing its first championship in years. By the time he arrived in Chicago, the numbers behind him were almost absurd in their scale. 629 goals and 59 assists in 869 professional appearances across all competitions, 33 major trophies, 3 La Liga titles, a Champions League, a Club World Cup, 7 Bundesliga Golden Boots, a Liga Golden Boots, a Liga Golden Boot, 2 FIFA Best Men's Player Awards, and a Bundesliga single-season scoring record that had stood since before his own father was out of his 20s. Windy City!
Twice in his career, more than a decade apart, a man named Robert has had to play through the most physically vulnerable moments of his life. In front of the whole world, his face quite literally hidden behind protective plastic. The first time came in May 2015 in a Bundesliga match. He crashed violently into the Borussia Dortmund goalkeeper, fracturing both his nasal septum and his jaw. Most players would have missed weeks. He missed 1 match. The staff fitted him with a specially molded protective mask, and within days even the squad for a Champions League semi-final against Barcelona. It did not go well. They were beaten 3-0 on the night. Restricted by the plastic and clearly uncomfortable, he struggled to have any real influence. He would later admit with characteristic understatement that wearing it had simply not been a pleasant experience. The man in the mask, hiding a broken face behind the protection, going back to work regardless. Going back to work regardless. A story from a different decade. Indestructible number 9. 11 years later, in almost eerie symmetry, it happened again. This time in Barcelona colors. In Barcelona colors. In late February 2026, he suffered a fracture to the inner wall of his left eye socket during a league match against Villarreal. He missed a Copa del Rey semi-final defeat to Atletico Madrid, watching in agony from the stands as they were eliminated, before doctors fitted him with a new carbon fiber mask and cleared him at 37 to return against Athletic Club at San Mamés. It was the same story. An agent, indestructible number 9, refusing to sit out a title race, hiding a broken face behind the molded protection. Marseille, 100 seconds. Poland had never won a match at a European Championship until 2016 in France, and it was him, fittingly, who dragged them into relevance. They reached the quarterfinals, setting up a meeting with Cristiano's Portugal in Marseille, going back to work regardless. Going back to work regardless.
It took Lewandowski 1 minute and 40 seconds to make his mark. Portugal fullback Cedric Soares misjudged a high ball. Kamil Grosicki pounced and squared it low across the box, and Lewandowski steered it home first time. The second fastest goal in Europe Championship history, and the end of a personal 6-4 minute scoreless run in Euros football that had stretched back 4 years. For a few minutes, Poland were dreaming of a first-ever semi-final. 18-year-old Renato Sanchez, who would be a Bayern Munich teammate of Lewandowski's within weeks, leveled the score just before halftime with a rocket from outside the box. Neither side could find a winner across 90 minutes or time, and the tie went to penalties. Both captains, Ronaldo and Lewandowski, buried their opening spot kicks with total conviction. It was Poland, in the end, who blinked. Jakub Blaszczykowski's effort was saved, and Ricardo Quaresma converted. The winning kick to send Portugal through on their way to eventually lifting the trophy. Lewandowski's tournament ended in heartbreak, but the 100-second goal in Marseille remains one of the signature moments of his international career. A reminder that even in a career defined by relentless accumulation, he was also capable of pure, instant theater. Chapter 15, a boycott, a captain's word, and a playoff winner. By early 2022, Robert Lewandowski was not just Poland's best player, he was, by consensus, its moral compass. That role was tested. That role was tested in the most serious way imaginable. That February launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, with Poland scheduled to travel to Moscow the following month for a World Cup qualifying playoff semi-final against Russia itself. The Polish Federation moved fast. Its president Cezary Kaleza announced that Poland would simply refuse to play the fixture, declaring that the time for words was over. Lewandowski backed the decision immediately, unambiguously, saying he could not imagine his country facing the Russian national team while armed aggression against Ukraine was underway, while also noting that Russian players and fans themselves bore no responsibility for their government's actions. Sweden and the Czech Republic quickly joined the boycott and ultimately expelled Russia from the qualifying path altogether, handing Poland a walkover into the playoff final.
That final brought Poland face to face with Sweden instead, a meeting that would later echo with cruel irony 4 years down the line. In March 2022, scored the opening goal in a 2-0 win over the Swedes and Korzał, sending Poland to a second consecutive World Cup and taking a 75 goals in the process. It is a strange quirk of the story that Sweden would be the opponent, standing directly in Poland's path again in March 2026. Only that time, on the losing end of the scoreline, it would be Lewandowski's own playoff exit that Sweden inflicted, closing the door on a third World Cup rather than opening one. Cardiff nerves. 2 years before the Sweden heartbreak, Lewandowski had already lived through one white-knuckle playoff final, this one in Cardiff. In March 2024, with a place at Euro 24 on the line against Gareth Bale's Wales. It was a strange goalless, deeply tense 90 minutes in extra time. Poland barely registered a shot on target across the full 120 minutes. And Wales roared on by a full Cardiff City stadium. Looked the more likely winners for long stretches, even playing the closing moments with 10 men after a red card. But football at that level often comes down to nerve rather than chances created. And it was Lewandowski as captain who stepped up first in the shootout, sending Gokli Peer Danny Ward the wrong way with a composed, almost contemptuous send-off penalty to set the tone. Converted all 5 of their kicks. Wales, taking their first ever competitive shootout, missed their 5th through Daniel James, and Poland went through 5-4. It secured Poland's 5th consecutive appearance at a European Championship, and extended for a little longer Lewandowski's own remarkable run of never missing a major tournament he was fit to play in. The diplomat's penalty. Poland's Euro 2024 campaign in Germany that summer was, by any measure, a disappointment. 3 group games, no wins, elimination confirmed for the final round of fixtures that even been played. But the closing act against France in Dortmund produced one of the more quietly remarkable statistical footnotes of Lewandowski's entire international career. 75 goals.
Kylian Mbappe playing behind a protective mask of his own after breaking his nose earlier in the tournament. Opened the scoring from the penalty spot in the second half, his first ever Europe Championship goal. With nothing left to play for, his first ever European Championship goal. With nothing left to play for, and already eliminated Poland might have been forgiven for folding. Instead, 22 minutes later, Karol Swiderski was hauled down in the box, and Lewandowski stepped up. His first attempt was saved by Mike Maignan, but the France goalkeeper had strayed off his line early, and Lewandowski was given a second chance, which he did not waste. The match finished 1-1. The goal meant something beyond pride. It made Lewandowski at 35 only the third player in the history of the European Championship, alongside Cristiano Ronaldo and Luka Modric, to score in 4 different editions of the tournament spanning 2012 through 2024. In a summer that had otherwise gone badly for Poland, it was a small, precise reminder of exactly why he had been the difference between qualifying and staying home in the first place. Unknown Lewandowski on screen. In the summer of 2021, fresh off break his near half-century-old Bundesliga scoring record, Lewandowski agreed to open up his life to cameras for the first time in a serious way. Amazon Prime Video, working with the Polish production films and director Maciej Kowalczyk, began work on what would become the first feature, Hostage. It was built around an unusually deep bench of interviews for a footballer's documentary, not just family, his mother Iwona, his sister Melina, his wife Anna, his daughters Clara and Laura, but a genuine cross-section of the game's biggest names from every stage of his career. Jurgen Klopp spoke of Dortmund, Xavi Hernandez of Barcelona. Lewandowski described it as an unvarnished account of both the highs and the setbacks, avoiding the polish that defines Athletic Commission documentaries. Whatever one makes of the finished film, the guest list alone stands as a fairly remarkable testament. Looking back at 8 years of near metronomic goal scoring, Lewandowski's first season at Bayern did not begin as a seamless continuation. He arrived into his side being remade by Pep Guardiola around principles, almost opposite to the vertical, transition-based football Klopp had built at Dortmund. Patient possession, positional rotation, a build-up structure that asked strikers to drop deep and combine rather than simply attack space and behind, for a player whose defining instinct was to arrive at speed. Exactly where a defense was weakest, the adjustment period was real, even if it never showed up as a dramatic slump in the raw numbers. For the better part of a decade and a half, the conversation about the best footballer alive belonged almost exclusively to 2 men. Lewandowski's career ran alongside and occasionally directly through theirs, without him ever fully displacing either from that due in Champions League semi-final to reach a European final. As a 24-year-old, he faced Messi's Barcelona repeatedly across a decade with Bayern. Lewandowski scored on his competitive Bayern debut and kept scoring throughout that first season. But pundits and some inside the club debated whether a classic penalty box poacher could ever be the perfect fit for Guardiola's fluid system. A question that would follow false nine-ops says Guardiola teams for years. The Wolfsburg 5-goal explosion in September 15 arriving as a substitute was in some ways the answer to that question in the most emphatic language possible. Was in some wall of a question written in the most emphatic language possible. Whatever system Bayern were playing when the ball reached Lewandowski. Inside the width of the penalty area, the system stopped mattering. For the better part of a decade and a half, the conversation about the best footballer alive belonged almost exclusively to 2 men. Lewandowski's career ran alongside and occasionally directly through theirs, without him ever fully displacing either from that due in Champions League semi-final to reach a European final. As a 24-year-old, he faced Messi's Barcelona repeatedly across a decade with Bayern. He finished runner-up to Messi in the 2020 Ballon d'Or voting. Pundits, teammates, and rival managers spent the 2021 stretch's statistical peak regularly debating whether he had become purely as a goal full stop, ahead of both members of football's reigning duopoly on any given week. by the time Guardiola left for Manchester City in 2016. The businessman, long before athlete, as entrepreneur became a familiar career template. Lewandowski was quietly building a business portfolio that extended well past boot deals and shampoo adverts. In 2017, he and a business partner, Dawit Urban, invested in Samurai Labs, apologized to bullying and online harassments, and unusually specific and socially minded cause for an athlete's early investment portfolio. In 2018, he launched our line, a personal fashion. In 18, he launched our line, a personal fashion and nutrition brand built in close collaboration with Anna. Followed soon after by Store 9, a marketing, advertising, and public relations agency. The couple some gained and agents the group to build out a dedicated media division. He also took a stake in Protos Venture Capital, Warsaw firm back at early stage internet startup. Said he saw real potential in the sector and that his own football experience could prove genuinely useful to the development side of the business. None of it was purely commercial.
Lewandowski has built a long-standing reputation in Poland for charitable engagement with causes, supporting disadvantaged families and children. Work that alongside his sustained excellence on the pitch has made him one of the most consistently respected public figures in the country, well beyond the normal boundary of football fandom. Yeah. Between the family brand built Anna, the start investments and the philanthropy, the picture that emerges is of an athlete. Began planning for life after football, years before that life was anywhere close to necessary. Treating the construction of a post-playing career with the same patience, discipline he brought to the 18-yard box. Chapter 22, the numbers no one else has. Strip away the narrative, and the case for Robert Lewandowski is one of the most statistically extraordinary strikers the sport has produced can be made in raw figures alone.
The numbers no one else has. Strip away the narrative, and the case for Robert Lewandowski as one of those statistically extraordinary strikers the sport has produced can be made in raw figures alone.
By the time he signed for Chicago Fire in the summer of 2026, he had scored 629 goals and provided 1,559 assists in 869 professional appearances across all competitions. A career by that stage spanning 5 clubs and more than 2 decades since his debut in Poland's lower divisions. He had won 33 major trophies, 10 Bundesliga titles between Dortmund and Bayern, 3 La Liga titles with Barcelona, 1 Champions League, 1 FIFA Club World Cup, and a long list of domestic and European Cups and Super Cups besides. He was, at the point of his Camp Nou departure, the joint all-time record holder for top scorer awards across Europe's 5 biggest leagues with 7 Bundesliga golden boots plus a La Liga Pichichi trophy, a haul matched by almost no one in the history of the continental game. His 41-goal Bundesliga season in 2021 broke a scoring record that had stood seemingly permanently since 1972. He held 4 separate Guinness World Records stemming from the line of tickets Wolfsburg in 2015 for Poland. He retired from active qualifying duty, if not as of mid-2026 from the national team altogether, as the country's all-time leading scorer and most capped player by a distance that will likely take a generation to meaningfully close. 2 individual absences stand out precisely because everything else is present. No Ballon d'Or canceled in the 1 year he was the outright favorite to win it, and denied gnarly the year after, and for a long stretch of his career, no World Cup goal at all. A weight finally broken against Saudi Arabia in Qatar in 2022 in what turned out to be his final World Cup appearance. Everything else that professional football has to offer over a 2-decade career. In other words, he simply collected 1 goal, 1 trophy, 1 record at a time, without ever really stopping to make a show of it.
There is a particular kind of greatness that breeds on moments of flight, a dribble no other could execute, a goal that reclaims the possible light. His legend has always been a different, quieter kind, relentless, repeatable, and industrial consistency. Across 4 leagues, 3 countries, and 5 different crests, from a polished third-tier side to Major League Soccer tests, the one constant has been an almost eerie sameness in the yield. A goal roughly every game, year after year, across every field. Regardless of manager, of system, or the noise of the saga's drone, he collected it all anyway, methodically, and always on his own. He never got the individual honor in the year he deserved the most, nor the second World Cup finish arriving late on the Qatar coast. He lost his major final at Wembley as a youth of 24, and waited 7 years for a trophy he wards meant to stay even more for, but leagues that them all to stay unbroken. The words of the records were unspoken, not with the theater, but with an almost unsettling gravity. In the summer of 26, as he pulled on a North American team kit, at 37, a long way from the beginning, he made his final commit. That ever vitality showed no sign of stopping as the wind turned cold. Whether the Great Lakes is the finish, or just the next part of the story told. The story has always been less about a single moment caught in time than the sheer grinding weight of every peak and every climb. One more time.